Hello, this is the Political Matrix. I am your host, Young Morpheus. For this video, I wanted to go in a little bit about a video which I saw on Truth Unedited. I know I share some of his work sometimes on the show, and I decided to cut out this particular portion. Now, you guys can look in the description box, and you can be able to find the full show that he did. I'll link it below if you want to check out the full thing in its entirety. But here's something that's key that I wanted to focus on in here. So hopefully you guys enjoy the video. I will stop running my mouth, let the part that I wanted to catch jump out, and let you guys check that out, and then I'll catch you guys on the other side to give some of my thoughts on it. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Thank you.
So summing up the problem in this current system that needs to be reset, there is no committee or organization to save the world. And he noted this in an example how during the pandemic, each individual nation has their own solution to the virus, and there was not a world coordinated response. Global governance will change this, and this will be the outcome of the geopolitical reset. And this leadership will not be placed in the role of the United States, who is the leader of this current world order, nor will it be China, who is the main rival to the leader of the current world order. And that's why understanding the global governance is important. Now, the increasing rivalry between the United States and China is just the main narrative and scapegoat that will be used to bring about this global governance outcome of the geopolitical reset. As he said in the book on page 119, after 40 years of strategic engagement, the US and China now seem unable to bridge the ideological and political divides that separate them. Far from uniting the two geopolitical giants, the pandemic did the exact opposite by exacerbating their rivalry and intensifying competition between them. And then, at the end of this discussion on this issue, he basically explained that the real lesson here is not that the US is finished and China is going to be the dominant power of the 21st century. I think the reality is that all the superpowers, the United States, the People's Republic of China, and the European Union, have been exposed as highly dysfunctional. Being big, as the proponents of this idea argue, entails diseconomies of scale. Countries or empires have grown so large as to reach a threshold beyond which they cannot effectively govern themselves.
I'd add, most are not properly self-governed because of an outsized influence that is controlling and manipulating most of the world powers.
And so what we should come to expect is that the conflict and rivalry between the United States and China will lead to a loss of leadership in the world, and at the end of all this chaos, we will see the geopolitical system reset itself. Now, Klaus Schwab also wrote a book after the Great Reset entitled The Great Narrative for a Better Future. And in this book, he also discusses geopolitics in regards to the overall narrative. On page 75 of the book, he writes, "The rising and seemingly intractable rivalry between China and the United States represents the greatest geopolitical concern of our times, for two reasons. One, the rivalry has the potential to generate global repercussions on an unprecedented scale and in a multiplicity of domains. And two, no global issue can be significantly addressed without a modicum of cooperation between the two rivals. As a result, the geopolitical landscape will suffer from a global order deficit. For all these reasons, in the years to come, the quality of the relationship between China and the United States will be the overpowering factor determining most of the global outcome, geopolitically of course, but in other areas as well." And hopefully, by hearing all this, you really understand the point of why we are seeing this conflict grow increasingly unstable. This is by design, and it's being used to reset the geopolitical structure of this world towards global governance. And this conflict will increase until the chaos occurs that produces the order that they desire. Now, I clearly show this from a standpoint from a major world player, Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum. This is an organization that is a think tank for the nations of the world. But because China is so isolated and no one really understands what is truly going on with them internally, maybe you may question if they are part of this agenda or they're just being used without knowledge. I think this is important to understand because once understood, it can truly assist you with understanding how controlled and guided this world really is. China is fully a part of this world agenda and guided and steered by the same powers that have guided this world into all of its modern wars and has been the unseen hand leading the world towards this new world order. As I showed in the first part of the Breaking Out of the Matrix series, we have to follow the money. And once we do, it is very easy to see the hand that has been guiding this rivalry. The Communist People's Republic of China did not just appear on the world stage by itself by making the right moves. It was carefully created and guided and then brought in. And then after its official entrance on the world stage, after 50 years, it has now been made ready to be the main rival that can help lead the world into the next stage of the geopolitical agenda. When really trying to understand this world, there's a part of mainstream history that is not given to the masses that believers should have when you're trying to really understand what is going on in geopolitics. In our modern day system, there has been an unseen hand guiding the ways of this world. For more than 2 centuries, the Rothschilds have ranked among the world's most famous, distinguished, and wealthiest families. It is not an overstatement to say that the family members were the richest people ever to live. As we seek to understand what has gone on behind the scenes in this world, if you do not understand or consider their influence, you will never understand the present world and what is occurring. To better understand China, you cannot gain this understanding without understanding the Rothschilds' influence. It is not a secret, it's just hidden in plain sight that the Rothschild family has been doing business in China since the early 19th century in the 1830s. As on their Rothschilds company website they explain, the Rothschilds family businesses can trace their first contact with China to the 1830s. Our business was one of the first Western business institutions to re-establish relations after 1953. We have direct access to the Chinese and North Asian markets through our local Chinese bankers who are based on the ground in Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong, and supported by a partnership in South Korea. We command an in-depth knowledge of the region's economic development and the challenges facing its industries, and have developed an exceptional understanding of the local regulatory and market environment. Our team is skilled at bridging the cultural gaps that can exist between the managements of foreign and local companies, and are the leading advisor to Chinese companies investing in Europe. Now, for a country that appears to be so isolated from the West, one that has a communist regime in charge of all aspects of the country, this connection is a little odd. So we should dig a little deeper. When the Rothschilds conducted their first cooperation with the Middle Kingdom, which is China, in 1838, it was under the reign of Guan. I don't know if I said that right. The 7th emperor of the Qing dynasty. After suffering the defeat from Western powers in the Opium Wars, China had to open various treaty ports along its coast for international trade. This event brought fundamental and long-lasting changes to the Chinese monetary and banking system, coming from the simultaneous establishment of Western merchant houses and later banks that engaged in money exchange and trade finance. Basically, the Opium Wars allowed the West into China, and the power of the world at the time was held by the Rothschild dynasty. The first firm evidence of official interaction between the Rothschilds and China dates from 1838, in the earliest surviving letters from the Rothschilds agents in Canton. It is said that the family was interested in the trade of silks feature alongside tin, tea, cochineal, quicksilver, and other commodities in a place on the earth that was pretty much untapped but full of activity. As the Rothschilds do, they appointed an agent, Jardine, Matheson and Company, to act as its eyes and ears in that once impenetrable market. After the Anglo-Chinese treaties of 1842 and 1858, which ended the Opium Wars, the Rothschilds moved to expand the Chinese links, taking on new agents focusing mainly on the trade of silver. For evidence of this early relationship, shown from the Rothschild archive, here is a gift given to Charles Rothschild from the Chinese Guangzhou official bank. Now, at the end of the 19th century, one of the Rothschild banks in Asia, Hong Kong Bank, had a successful rise. At the end of the century, Hong Kong Bank became virtually two banks. It was an exchange bank in the East and a merchant bank in London. And this led to the Accord on China loans between Hong Kong Bank and Deutsche Asiatic Bank in 1895. And then Hong Kong Bank agreed that if it needed help in placing a China loan in London, it would offer the business first to Rothschilds. Now, in case you don't recognize the name Hong Kong Bank, you may recognize it by its current name, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation Limited, commonly known as HSBC. Yeah, what I am sharing here is that the Rothschild dynasty already had an existing banking relationship in this Asian region, specifically in China and Japan, before the People's Republic of China ever existed. These business dealings were public. What was done in private is not easily as known. Now, long story short, the Qing dynasty, who the Rothschilds started their business relationship with, this dynasty collapsed, and then China fell into turmoil. There was a fight for power over some decades, and eventually the Chinese Nationalist Party unified China in 1928. They were now in control. And China was divided by the growing influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, one thing that is not clear or confirmed is the hand that the Rothschilds played in bringing communism into China, and how they supported the rise of Mao Zedong. Now, this is not documented, but the list of the associations make things quite clear when you know of their involvement in so many other endeavors in this world. You see, communism is a product of Karl Marx and his Communist Manifesto. Now, it's easily asked, how did this doctrine even make it into China? But whatever. It is a proven fact that Karl Marx shares a common ancestor of the Rothschilds bloodline. As you see from this family tree, Barent Cohen of Amsterdam is a relative of both Nathan Meyer, First Lord Rothschild, and also of Karl Marx. Karl Marx's communist doctrine was able to be spread because it was a product backed by the Rothschilds. It is claimed that this communist doctrine always had the aim of creating a revolution that would redefine reality in terms of the interests of these international bankers. These ideologies that we know as socialism, liberalism, fascism, neoconservatism, Zionism, and feminism are all modern isms, and they are all fronts for communism, which is all organized and funded by the central banking cartel. It is claimed that Mao Zedong was a product of the Rothschilds. In 1903, Yale Divinity School established a number of schools and hospitals throughout China that were collectively known as Yale in China. It has been said that Yale in China was an intelligence network whose purpose was to destroy the Republican movement of Sun Yat-sen on behalf of the Anglo-American establishment. The Anglo-American establishment hated Sun because he wanted to develop China apparently without the backing of the Rothschild banking system, which we see is common when we understand world history and how things happen in other countries as well. It is said one of Yale in China's most important students was Mao Zedong. During World War II, Yale in China was a primary instrument used by the U.S. establishment and its Office of Strategic Services, OSS, to install the Maoists in power. Yale in China was run by OSS operative Reuben Holden, the husband of Bush's cousin and also a member of Skull and Bones, which is from Yale. And after much conflict between Japan and then the Chinese Nationalist Party, on October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declares the founding of the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square. Beijing, who was funded by Rothschilds and led by Rothschild agent Solomon Adler, who was an economist who worked in the United States Treasury Department. He served as Treasury representative in China during World War II. After several years teaching at Cambridge University in England, he returned to China in the 1950s and was a resident there from the 1960s until his death, working as a translator, economic advisor, and possibly with the Central External Liaison Department, a Chinese intelligence agency. And from this, we see the rise of the People's Republic of China and the central bank, the People's Bank of China. So in examining this history, what you will see is that there was a constant influence of the Rothschild banking dynasty, and the rise of the Communist People's Republic of China was intentional. Now, after you understand that influence and how the rise of China's Communist Party began, it then gets very interesting. For the public, China has been outcasted from the international community. But then it was publicly made known that in 1953, the Rothschilds were amongst the first foreign institutions to re-establish connections with the communist regime after the Korean War, with dealings consisting primarily of gold trading with the Bank of China. But then we have what they call the week that changed the whole world.
On July 15, 1971, President Nixon requested time on national TV.
The announcement I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Peking and in the United States. Knowing of President Nixon's expressed desire to visit the People's Republic of China, Premier Zhou Enlai, on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, has extended an invitation to President Nixon to visit China.
The effect was electric. The idea was almost unimaginable. The Washington Post said, if Mr. Nixon had revealed he was going to the moon, he could not have flabbergasted his world audience more. The Cold War was raging. In Southeast Asia, China was North Vietnam's ally, and Richard Nixon's credentials as an anti-communist were long-standing and impeccable. But in the fall of 1967, Nixon wrote a seminal article about Asia after Vietnam. Taking the long view, he wrote, we simply cannot afford to leave China forever outside the family of nations. There is no place on this small planet for 1 billion of its potentially most able people to live in angry isolation. In January 1969, in his first inaugural address, President Nixon confirmed his determination to change America's policy toward China.
We seek an open world, a world in which no people, great or small, will live in angry isolation.
On February 17, 1972, after 2 years of secret and delicate negotiations, the President and First Lady were on their way to China.
Then a month later, Nixon removes the dollar off the gold standard.
The principal element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators.
None of this is coincidence. Now, all of that is well known. What is not known is about the power behind the scenes. In the book The Rockefellers, An American Dynasty by Peter Collier and David Horowitz, they speak about David Rockefeller, grandson of John D. Rockefeller, and at the time, chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, and a very important man to all of this. On page 407, when speaking about David, they write, among the powerful, the Chase Manhattan Bank ranked very near the top. At the time, David was deciding to turn down Nixon's offer of the Treasury post. He chaired a board of directors interlocked with the boards of Allied Chemical, Exxon, Standard of Indiana, Shell Oil, AT&T, Honeywell, General Foods, and dozens of other corporate giants. Chase was a leading stockholder in CBS, Jersey Standard, Atlantic Richfield, United Airlines, and a galaxy of other corporations from AT&T and IBM to Motorola and Safeway. The power this stockholding position conferred was immense. Yeah, it was immense. So the Chase Manhattan Bank was the leading stockholder of these companies, giving them the most say about what happens with these corporations. And David Rockefeller was the chairman of Chase, along with the chairman of a board of directors of other major companies. Companies that, for the most part, all exist today in power, I might add. So I explain all this to show the power and control that this one man had. But on page 429 of the book, they explained David was also looking farther east. On March 5th, 1971, he told a select group of European businessmen meeting in Rome that there must be more U.S. trade with the Soviet and especially the Chinese governments, and that the Iron Curtain must be replaced with a plate glass curtain. 4 days later, he told a financial forum in Singapore, organized by the Chase, that it was unrealistic for the United States to act as if a country of 800 million people did not exist. And he said that we must establish contacts with the People's Republic of China. Do you see how he's speaking about what the United States should do? It should also be noted that David Rockefeller was offered the position of Treasury Secretary of the United States at the same time when Nixon was taking the dollar off the gold standard. But David did not need to be so open in the limelight, especially being that he had Henry Kissinger a part of Nixon's cabinet. Henry Kissinger himself made a couple secret trips to China to work on the relationship with China, and he was present when Nixon went there. And shortly after we had that announcement from Nixon, in his book, David Rockefeller's Memoirs, on page 242, chapter 18, Penetrating the Bamboo Curtain, he writes, late in the evening of June 29, 1973, barely a month after the opening of Chase's Moscow office, Peggy and I sat in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, talking with Premier Zhou Enlai, a man second in rank and power only to Mao Zedong. This was my first trip to China, and it was a historic one, as I was the first American banker to visit the People's Republic of China. That afternoon, I had signed an agreement that made Chase the first U.S. correspondent bank of the Bank of China since the communist takeover 23 years earlier. Yeah, so then we already saw the Rothschild connection, but later on, after the establishment of the Communist Party of China, then we see David Rockefeller was the first American banker to visit the People's Republic of China. There are no coincidences here. Now, after Nixon went to China, he made a joint declaration with China, which is known as the Shanghai Communique in 1972. And in this declaration, it was stated, the two sides reviewed the long-standing serious disputes between China and the United States. The Chinese side reaffirmed its position. The Taiwan question is the crucial question obstructing the normalization of relations between China and the United States. The government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government of China. Taiwan is a province of China, which has long been returned to the motherland. The liberation of Taiwan is China's internal affair in which no other country has the right to interfere, and all U.S. forces and military installations must be withdrawn from Taiwan. The Chinese government firmly opposes any activities which aim at the creation of one China, one Taiwan, one China, two governments, two Chinas, an independent Taiwan, or advocate that the status of Taiwan remains to be determined. And this was in 1972 they made this. And so therefore we have the premise here of the narrative that we are seeing unfolding today. 50 years later, it is being played out and escalated, and seems as if it's just a part of modern geopolitics. But when understanding truly how the world works from the inside, we can see things are much deeper than they actually appear. There are so many other pieces to all this. The history runs deep, and it's all hidden right in plain sight. The unseen hand is run through international financiers, international bankers that fund wars, revolutions, and full national economies. And this influence has never decreased. These international bankers were always intertwined with Chinese companies. They rebuilt the whole way China's economy was to work. And the point I'm making is that they developed this current superpower. China did not just do this on their own. What we see in China is not a mistake, but it has been very intentional. The unseen hand of this world had their hands and influence completely on China and helped them develop as a rival to the United States, all in order to bring about the New World Order that is on the way. You can be blinded by the media and false narratives being presented, and you can see the conflict that they are pursuing. But as a believer, you should know that this is all part of the same coin being promoted by the unseen hand of international bankers that control the world behind the scenes. When I started this video, before going into the history of China and going into their connections with the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, I first went into discussing this topic by explaining the current narrative that they are using towards this great reset. I wanted you to understand their game and the agenda. This is the narrative that they are speaking on and promoting. And when it all goes down and documentaries and history books are written, this is how the story will be told. All the narrative from what we see in the mainstream media. But the behind the scenes, what is really happening, is not known. You must know and understand just how connected and controlled the world really is. You must understand this information isn't hidden, it's right there in plain sight. But because of our education system and so many other distractions, the majority is just not trained or desire to look into it this far. But make no mistake, everything we see is controlled and orchestrated, and it's leading to an inevitable controlled conflict. They are just waiting for the seals of revelation to be lifted. You cannot allow yourself to be caught up in the politics and all the propaganda, regardless of the side.
All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. Hopefully it tied in with a lot of things I've been trying to point out in a couple other videos I've done concerning, like the elites and so-called Illuminati. And hopefully it will tie in to some of the understanding and some of these ties as we get further into the next video, which we're going to do. Hopefully I'll have help from some of my, I guess, friends of the show and family of the show who come on occasionally, Jack Sith and Shadow Band. But if not, know that some of this work that I'm going to be putting out is going to be research which they have helped me with, and other names which I've reached out to. And so a big shout out to all of those who helped me in getting this done. Also, Cy Lawson. But the one thing which I wanted to kind of push back on in this video is it talks about the rise of China and some of the things which the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds did as far as the banking system in China and helping build some of those things up. But one of the key things which I feel it leaves out in its whole total assessment in this whole picture is Russia involved. Russia is still a mortal enemy to the so-called Illuminati or elite or whatever you guys want to call them, the international banking cartel, whatever you guys want to call them. Russia is still outside of that lens, and as long as Russia is still outside of that lens, it is going to always have that enemy out there and always give an outlet or avenue for people who are involved with working with these elite families that are disgruntled to take another approach. So for those who think that China is just completely under thumb and they're walking heel to toe in this whole kind of destruction of the fiat currency, or controlled demolition, as some people will say, which will usher us into a lot more of the cryptocurrency, blockchain, and things like that, and possibly even social credit scores. All of these things like that are all the goals, I believe, I theorize, and many others out there from the actions that we're seeing, that it looks like this is the approach that they're going for. But just because people have intentions and plans does not mean that the plans are always going to pan out. So I want us to always keep that in mind and note that this partnering or teaming up with Russia and China has to be factored in also. It just can't be the West influence on China, what, 40, 50 years ago. We have to always keep in mind what the present climate is, because things are always changing like they always were changing back then, and dynasties change, and then you have dynasties, you have emperors and leaders of certain dynasties which are pushing back, some which are more compliant. Just like the other day when we had Pasta on, I was trying to remember which leader, and I was saying Gorbachev, and he reminded me, no, it's Yeltsin. Just like how Yeltsin was a complete pushover for the West and was doing a lot of the West bidding, that does not mean every other Russian leader was the same way. And so we can't think the whole stage, everything is pro wrestling, these are fake wars. These will be real wars that will happen. And sad to say it, but I believe loss of life is part of the collateral damage calculation which these elites put into place. So hopefully you guys all enjoy that. Hopefully that was informative, and hopefully we see you guys on the next show. Thank you. Have a good one.